Well, good morning. Good to see you all today. We live in a heightened state of awareness of the digital world around us, both as an enabler but also a distractor. We have governments and user expectations on privacy, data security, supply chain integrity increasing around us on a regular basis. And I'm sure many of us wake up with alerts on our phones notifying us of updated operating systems or applications overnight, providing us a sense of protection of the devices we use. Today's panel will focus on the importance of transparency in cybersecurity and how that plays directly into trust and confidence in the products and services we use, both directly as well as our customers, to protect our networks and data. So we're joined today by two noteworthy experts, Suzanne Spaulding, former Undersecretary, Department of Homeland Security, overseeing cybersecurity and critical infrastructure, what is now today known as CISA, also a member of the Cybersecurity Solarium Commission, and 35 plus years from Capitol Hill, the administration as well as private sector focus on cybersecurity issues. Thanks for joining us today. And Carroll Windsor, our product CISO as well as head of our PSAC efforts. And following on what Jim just mentioned on the important karaoke event tomorrow, I was not there, but I hear he does an amazing Tom Jones impersonation. And will likely be there tomorrow, so please keep that in mind. We also hope to wrap up today with some time for some questions and answers. Microphones will be floated around, so once we get there, please raise your hand. We'll not only be taking questions, but also song requests for Carl, if you have any. So we'll start today with Suzanne. You've been outspoken proponent of the importance of training to fight in the light. Can you speak to that and give us a little bit more background in terms of what that means?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you, Hugh, and to Fortinet for inviting me to be part of this important conversation that you all are having this week. It's great to be here again. So yeah, training to fight in the light. In a nutshell, the idea is, if you train to fight in the dark, you could wait for night to fall or turn out the lights and you'd have the advantage over your adversary, right? So my sense is that a transparent world is coming at us full steam ahead. And whoever can figure out how to operate in a transparent world most effectively is going to have the advantage. If you train to fight in the light, then as a democracy, we can turn on the lights, revealing the corruption that authoritarian and totalitarian leaders try to hide in the dark corners in their societies, right? We can learn how to thrive in an environment where our adversaries are spending many, many resources to steal our secrets, right? And that's the notion of training to fight in the light. If you can learn how to operate without assuming that you can keep secrets, the shelf life of secrets is vanishingly short. If you can learn how to operate without assuming that you have a monopoly on information, that you know something, that you've discovered something, and no one else is going to independently discover that, right? If you can wrap your head around that and really incorporate that into how you operate, you will have the advantage.
Which is interesting because you spent so much of your career protecting data, protecting secrets. How do you balance the fighting in the light with the rest of your career focusing on protecting the data and keeping it secret?
Well, it's interesting, Hugh. I first started thinking about this in 2010. The director of I worked a number of years at CIA and in the intelligence community, and the director of national intelligence had an open source conference. And one of the panels, the guy from CIA, Dan, whose title is Intellipedia Doyen, which I love, but he was one of the developers of their Intellipedia, said, in 15 years, there'll be no more secrets. And, that was back in 2008, I guess was the conference. So he didn't quite have the timeline right, but he had the trend line right. And so I started thinking about this and working on this idea, and I got the head of counterintelligence for the government, the person who really is focused on keeping our secrets, to co-sponsor with me a conference entitled No More Secrets, talking about how the government needs to get its head around this idea. It is very consistent with security. And the example I used, if you are, to my friends in the national security world, if you have a plan that depends on secrecy for success, you need another plan. If you're depending on keeping that secret for any period of time, that's a very brittle plan, right? And we all know if you try to keep everything secret, you can't keep anything secret, right? The overclassification problem is one of the biggest issues leading to the disclosure of sensitive information. And the same is true if you're looking at cybersecurity, right? If you're trying to protect everything, if you're trying to do that, old-fashioned perimeter defense, for example, hermetically seal somehow your network, you're going to fail. You've got to identify your crown jewels. You've got to figure out what you really need to protect and figure out how to mitigate what you should assume is the inevitable bad guy access to the rest of it.
I would have loved to have been in the room when you convinced them to co-sponsor that No Secrets event. Can you take kind of what we've spoken to thus far this morning and shift into the importance of transparency and fighting in the light and how that applies to cybersecurity and network security?
Yep, absolutely. So I gave a little example there, but part of the reason that the shelf life of secrets is vanishingly short is, because there are so many adversaries obviously pinging and trying to steal this, and the ubiquity of information. And what that does is it raises astronomically the costs of keeping secrets, the direct cost. I mean, Gartner, just take cybersecurity alone. Gartner estimated that in 2023, organizations spent collectively $188.3 billion on cybersecurity goods and services. And by 2026, they expect that to explode to $226 billion. That's a lot of direct costs. But I'm more focused on the indirect costs of trying to keep information secret, compete on the theory that you've got you can keep this information all secret and protected. I go back to 9/11. I was on a commission looking at, we'd spent 3 years looking at how we were prepared to respond to catastrophic attacks, terrorist attacks. And what we all came out of 9/11 understanding was that we had to move from need to know to need to share, right? Some of you are old enough to remember this. That what we had done was so successfully, we thought, keep information about what we knew about these terrorists secret, that the people who needed it in order to protect us and keep us safe didn't have it. And the same indirect costs are there in the world of cybersecurity, right? We have had overclassification in cybersecurity from the very beginning, and a desire and an instinct among the companies, right, to keep information secret, don't tell anybody, don't let anybody know. And we are increasingly understand we have got to share our information. That is what is going to make us more secure. Greater transparency is what is going to make us more secure.
Thank you. Carroll, Suzanne mentioned the fact that secrets have a very short shelf life, as well as, we've talked a little bit about the importance of the burden on the vendor community to be more forthcoming. From a Fortinet perspective, can you speak to how the dynamic between product security and goals of being transparent?
Yeah, we have at Fortinet, we have a complete transparency program. You'll have seen advisories that we publish. We put them out regardless of where we discover those vulnerabilities. If we discover them internally, we treat them exactly the same way as if we discover a vulnerability externally. That's really important because vendors who are not publishing all of their vulnerabilities, and perhaps they publish bugs rather than vulnerabilities, crashes that may have been could be used as a vulnerability. That's problematic because then you as customers, you as users and consumers don't know that you need to upgrade your devices. So for us, complete transparency, and going back to something that Suzanne said earlier was something I say, which is very similar, is sunlight is the greatest disinfectant. Get things out, get them into the hands of the people that need to know the information as quickly as possible so we can take actions. That gets us one step ahead of the adversaries who are all there trying to compromise devices. So definitely that 100% transparency program that we operate is incredibly important.
So if I was an organization, I would be looking at efficiency, performance, cost of a product, but also transparency of the vendor I'd be working with. I'm sure I'm not alone on that. How does one determine whether a company is being forthcoming? Are there government standards or best practices that one can look at and determine whether a vendor is or is not being transparent?
First thing, take a look at the organization's advisories. Ours all publicly available. We don't hide them behind paywalls, behind support sites. Take a look at all of the announcements that are being made, and see where they were discovered. And ours, you can see 83% of all of our discoveries, our vulnerabilities that are discovered are internal. You'll see our engineers quoted as being who discovered those issues. So take a look at that. Take a look at the organization's release notes. Are things that are bugs, and if there are a lot of bugs and crashes and very few vulnerabilities, for me, that rings alarm bells, because they're not really being totally transparent, or they're not researching, they're not looking at a bug and seeing whether or not it could be exploited. So really, you can look at an organization's website and very quickly ascertain whether or not they're being totally transparent, I would say.
Suzanne, from the government perspective, do you see other ways that CISA or other entities can help increase that awareness as to who's being transparent, or make sure that important issues such as responsible disclosure are being uniformly adopted?
Yeah, I think they can, and I think they're trying to move in that direction, right? And I think it goes hand in hand with the emphasis on secure by design and secure by default, and the incident reporting. One of the things that we've talked about mandatory incident reporting for decades in the cybersecurity world, and what I always heard when I was the Undersecretary at DHS, when companies would say, you can't, we can't disclose our incidents because our competitors aren't disclosing theirs, and that will put us at a competitive disadvantage. It will be a stigma. It will look like we're the only ones that are getting attacked when really everybody's getting attacked. And so we heard that, and the only way to get over that, ultimately, is to have this mandatory incident reporting, is to say, no, everybody has to be on a level playing field. Everyone is getting attacked every day, and we need to eliminate the stigma associated with that. And the same thing has to happen now with respect to these vulnerability disclosures. And I think Jen Easterly, my friend who now runs CISA, is working on that and trying to lift up and hold as exemplars companies like Fortinet that are forthcoming about their vulnerabilities, and when they put out these advisories. It may be that we'll come to a point where they realize that they're going to have to mandate some kind of regime, or at least a mechanism in which, when you do announce a vulnerability, you have to disclose how long you've known about it, for example. I think that's a huge issue. How long does it take a company between the time they detect it till the time they tell you, who need to have that information, about it? A lot of meetings in the White House Situation Room around the vulnerability disclosure policies for the administration. And always, mindful that you don't want to necessarily rush news about a vulnerability out before you have mitigation guidance that you can give with it, because the bad guys will figure out how to exploit it, perhaps before you defenders can figure out how to defend that. But timeliness is critical.
From a Fortinet perspective, I'd welcome some kind of government standard for this. We utilize what is already out there. For example, we use CVSS scoring to tell you the severity of the score. Not every vendor does. That's really important, because if a vendor's just making up a score based on what they think, and then the CVSS score is totally different, there's no consistency across organizations. So yeah, a standard that we would sign up to instantly to enforce those kind of utilizing common practices like CVSS scoring, like publishing timings, and putting in mitigations into your advisories, we'd welcome that, because we think we're already operating at best practice in those areas.
That's a good point, because I think that increased awareness would better empower folks that are looking to determine what products and services they work with to support their networks and data. Suzanne, you mentioned the word stigma a few times. I think that currently the stigma has been focused quite heavily on those that are following or promoting responsible disclosure, which of course the goal there is to increase awareness, make sure folks know the patches as well as workarounds are available, with the goal of providing a stronger security posture at the end. Do you believe that stigma is misplaced? And how do we shift from where it is today to where it might better be suited?
Yeah, until we can use AI or find other ways to have perfect code, we are going to have vulnerabilities. And all software is going to have vulnerabilities. All of our products are going to have vulnerabilities. And so the real question is, how soon are you going to find out about those vulnerabilities so that you can take appropriate mitigation measures? And I do think that, again, as we push toward this shifting the responsibility, as the administration has put such an emphasis on shifting responsibility from the end user to those who are putting things out on the market, that this is increasingly going to be a part of that. And a recognition, but they're going to have to be very mindful of it and intentional about messaging that coming forward and disclosing vulnerabilities, if you've got a good process in place to detect those and to quickly come up with mitigations and put it out, that is something to be lifted up. When we first put in CDM, Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation, from DHS across the federal government networks and systems, it provided a level of visibility that had never been there before into what was going on in the networks. And it was not a pretty sight, right? And so we all know that the initial stage of that radical transparency is going to be ugly. But that is what we have to do.
Perfect transition into the next topic we want to talk about today. Earlier this year, the White House released the National Cybersecurity Strategy, and since then has done quite a bit related to implementation of that strategy. Two of the core tenets are secure by default, secure by design, and very clear understanding that transparency, which we've been talking about today, is foundational to both of those elements. Suzanne, could you speak to kind of your perspective of those two goals and what they mean for the broader ecosystem moving forward?
Yeah, again, I think it goes back to this notion of we gotta shift some of this burden back off of the end users, and we have to make. I mean, I do a lot of work in the disinformation information operations, particularly from our foreign adversaries, and I talk about the fact that we need to make the stigma of sharing false information greater than the prestige of being the first one to share, right? We need to shift somehow the incentives, and this is not an easy thing to do, away from being first to market to being, secure and safe to market, right? And we need lots of moving parts to do that, including our tech analysts, right? The folks who write about products as they're coming out. They need to include, in addition to the columns about all the different features of the various products that they're reviewing, they need to have a column on security, right? And they need to have experts who can assess that, so that consumers begin to think, oh yeah, that should be part of my consideration, and I should be willing to pay a little bit more for that. And those are the kinds of things that we're going to have to do to incentivize that secure by design. My good friend, former Congressman Jim Langevin, was very big on on imposing liability for putting out a product that contains vulnerabilities. And that seems like a pretty straightforward, anytime you impose liability, you're going to get a lot of pushback. But those are the kinds of things we have to do in order to create the right kinds of incentives for designing products that are more secure and putting products out there that don't require the end user to go in and change the default password from password, right? So that's the secure by default, right?
I want to pick up on this because about 18 months ago, we rewrote our secure product development lifecycle. We have a top 10 commandments in that, and number 1, secure by design. Number 2, secured by default. We've changed a lot of things over the past 18 months to try and help with that. So, for example, on security testing, we clearly have SAST, static code analysis. We have DAST, kind of vulnerability scanning built in. So every single build that comes out, we run through this process and we give a report back to the developers that they have to then go and cycle back. The goal of what we're trying to achieve is to shift security left. So try to get to the point where we're not having these vulnerabilities come out into production code, we're detecting them much earlier in the life cycle. Things like threat modeling to make sure we design vulnerabilities out of the product in the very, very first step. So all of these things are really important. I think the big change that we're making is to move to that secure by default stage. We're not totally there yet, but you will have noticed we've deprecated some of the less secure IPsec standards and HTTPS encryption standards, so that now we're trying to get to the point where we don't need a hardening guide anymore. We need basically to tell you how to turn things off and to make them less secure at your own risk. So big changes that are happening in those areas, together with trying to avoid that stigma that there are vulnerabilities. Every product has vulnerabilities. If someone says they don't, that I would not trust that fact. So you're going to have a vulnerability. So let's deal with the fact we're going to have to upgrade. Unfortunately, we're going to potentially have more vulnerabilities over the coming years as we're putting more and more resources into our PSAC team searching. It's important because it's like COVID. If you're not testing for COVID, you're not going to find COVID. Similarly, if you're not testing for vulnerabilities, you're not going to find them. So let's grasp the nettle. Let's know that we've got to keep updating our boxes. But as Fortinet, let's try and put systems in place to simplify that for you. So you may have noticed in the last 18 months, we added in the maturity and feature releases, so that we know that if you're going to upgrade, you want to know that you're going to go to a code that isn't going to change majorly, isn't going to add new features. You want stability. So that maturity release marking is really important for our customers. But then tools to help you, like our one notifying you in the UI there's a time to upgrade, or even the auto upgrade feature. I don't know if anybody's seen this, but in the I think it was the 7.2.4 release, we added in the ability to just allow the boxes to upgrade on a Sunday night at midnight, and just have the boxes auto upgrade. Optional, but it really helps our customers to keep security at the forefront.
So I was at dinner last night, overhearing a conversation of somebody from one of the companies saying that he was not a particularly favored person in the company because he was the one who was always overturning rocks and finding the problems everywhere. And it was like, okay, stop already. Just because you don't find the vulnerabilities doesn't mean the adversaries aren't going to find the vulnerabilities. That's part of this whole issue of no more secrets.
I think we're really watching a big shift here in the broader ecosystem with the White House's directives. I know we focus on secure by design, secure by default today, and there's quite a bit of work going on. As Carl mentioned, I think that's 2 of your 10 commandments, so there is quite a bit more to it.
I could keep you here all day.
Yeah.